Welcome to my Zone 6A garden. It's the end of December. It is the perfect time to go through the 5 great lessons I learned during the 2023 garden season. The first lesson I've learned might seem a little obvious at first, but I think my most important garden design tool is my camera. My camera is just as important to me now for gardening as my favorite spade or shears. Being able to capture my garden through the camera lens, season after season, has allowed me to start seeing gaps in the design in areas that really just aren't working. The biggest lesson for me is the importance of capturing the garden from roughly the same vantage point. I start documenting each area of the garden beginning in the early spring. And it's like freezing a moment in time, and all the images become like a visual garden diary. When you look back on the images over time, you can start to see what needs to change. You can see how the garden is progressing. Not only that, but you start to notice gaps in the design. You notice areas that they may need more plants or blooms during the spring or the late autumn. Once I started to understand how helpful these photos were to improving my garden design, I started to get a bit more intentional about it. It really helps if you can take photos from the same spot throughout the entire growing season. And if you can go back and look at these pictures and then put them together from spring until the late autumn, that is a super helpful tool. Having reference photos taken from the same spot throughout the growing season is kind of like having a time lapse of the garden's life. It provides a really clear picture of how the garden is evolving. The other thing I found is it's a great reminder. For me, I use my camera as a garden journal. It's easy to forget exactly where and when a plant was doing well or maybe wasn't doing well. And if you have a whole season's worth of photos, you can pinpoint exactly what changes need to be made. I found the most helpful thing is when you start to collect these photographs year over year, you get a great record of how the garden is changing. Because the garden is never static. It's always going through some transition. And these photographs are just a priceless way, perfect way to keep track of all those changes and to know what you want to do next. That brings us to the second lesson. The second lesson I've learned to create a great looking home garden is to simply repeat colors throughout the garden border. This has to be the easiest way to create a garden that looks amazing. And it's so simple. I found, honestly, that just taking groups of plants, the exact same plant, and putting them into the garden along the spacing of the garden border, that once you look at that garden and you look at it across the way, all those colors that are common just pull the whole design together. So by far, this is the easiest way to get a great looking garden. The third lesson I wish I learned earlier in my garden journey is the idea of planting and grouping plants in long, thin drifts. This is a lesson that I learned by reading Gertrude Jekyll's gardening books. Jekyll was a very famous English gardener who died in 1932. I actually made a video about her life, and I'll put a link in the description below. She explains that planting in long, thin drifts helps to avoid big gaps in your garden once the flowers have faded. It is a simple concept, but it's really quite brilliant. And she was right. Planting in these long, thin drifts really help to keep the garden from having big spaces once those flowers are done blooming for the season. The fourth gardening lesson I wish I learned sooner is the notion of planting bulbs with good companion plants to help hide the dying bulb foliage. I don't know about you, but the last thing I want to do in my garden is have to spend time digging up bulbs after they bloom because their dying foliage looks awful. We need to let the bulb foliage die back without cutting off the leaves so that we can make sure that the bulb is healthy for the next season and it'll continue to bloom. I don't get sponsored plants for Garden Moxie, so I don't have the budget to treat all bulbs like annuals. That's pretty expensive, at least in my opinion. So I try to keep the bulbs that I have growing by allowing them to die back. So the best planting combinations I've found in my garden that work pretty well are using native cranesbill with snowdrops and trout lily bulbs. Also Corydalis lutea, the yellow fringed leaf bleeding heart, makes a great companion with alliums. Hostas are great with daffodils and tulips and really any kind of bulb. Ferns are another great foliage plant. They can do a great job of hiding dying bulb foliage. I also love the combination, which I found this season, of planting daffodils with millennium alliums. The allium foliage just starts to grow when the daffodils fade. It's fairly easy to hide the daffodil foliage in the allium foliage if you plant the daffodils and the alliums next to each other. Learning how to cover the dying bulb foliage inside of other plants that are growing in your garden is definitely something worth doing, and it's a lesson that I wished I would have learned sooner. And honestly, it's a lesson I'm still learning now. So if you know a great foliage and bulb combination, can you leave that in the comments so that all of us can learn too? And that brings me to the fifth and final lesson that I wished I would have learned a long time ago. And that is to actually take time and spend that time in the garden and enjoy the things that the garden has to offer. Our gardens are more than just pretty flowers. For me, the garden is the greatest way to escape the crazy world that we live in. And it's just filled with so many opportunities to relax and just enjoy nature. I love to watch the birds. I love to make things. I love to make wreaths and things for not only decorating the garden, but also for decorating the home. So wreaths and cutting flowers and putting flowers on the table, all that stuff just, in my opinion, makes such a huge difference. It's so important to fill our lives with as much beauty as we can, and our gardens are the perfect way to do that. So by far, if there's no other lesson that we all learn from gardening, I hope that you'll learn this one with me. Take the time to get out in your garden and just enjoy the beauty of God's creation. My garden has definitely become my sanctuary. It is definitely the place I go to basically run away when things are getting stressful. And there's nothing better than just sitting out there and taking it all in. I am looking so forward to next garden season. There's just so much I want to do and so much I'm looking forward to. I hope you enjoyed learning about the lessons that I learned during this last garden season. It was a great garden season, and I am really looking forward to the next one. You know what? Leave me some comments below and let me know. I would love to hear what is your greatest takeaway from the 2023 garden season. That's it for this video, friends, and I'll see you in the next one.